The rescue of the cub should have been the end of our encounter, but it was actually just the beginning of the most extraordinary week of my life. As the sun rose over the Kalahari, the lioness gently picked up her recovered baby, and I expected her to disappear into the vast desert. Instead, she carried the cub to a shaded area, about 50 meters from my crash site, and settled down for what appeared to be an extended stay. She had decided that my location was now under her protection. Over the next few hours, other members of her pride began to arrive. First came 2 more lionesses who approached cautiously, but showed no aggression toward me. The original lioness vocalized to them in what sounded like explanation or instruction. She was telling them about what had happened. She was sharing the story of how the strange human had saved her cub's life. By midday, I found myself in the surreal situation of being surrounded by an entire pride of desert lions who seemed to have appointed themselves as my guardians. They positioned themselves in a protective perimeter around my crash site, creating a safe zone that no other predators would dare to enter. I was probably the safest person in the entire Kalahari despite being stranded and injured. The lionesses took turns bringing me food, fresh kills that they would drag to within 20 meters of my shelter before retreating to a respectful distance. They were sharing their hunt with me. In lion society, this is one of the highest honors. They were treating me as a member of their pride, as someone who had earned a place in their family through my actions. Dr. Sarah Oching from the University of Botswana later explained that what I was witnessing was unprecedented in the scientific literature. Wild lions don't adopt humans. They don't share resources with other species. They certainly don't provide protection for potential prey animals. But this pride had redefined their understanding of family to include the person who had saved one of their cubs. On the second day, the original lioness brought me another patient, a different cub from her pride, who was showing signs of the same dehydration and fever that had nearly killed the first one. She placed the sick baby at my feet and then backed away with the same trusting gesture she had used before. She was asking me to work another miracle. This second cub was in better condition than the first had been and responded quickly to treatment. But what amazed me was how the entire pride participated in the healing process. They formed a circle around us while I worked providing protection and moral support. They were creating a medical facility in the middle of the desert with me as the attending physician. Word of my situation had apparently spread beyond the immediate pride. On the third day, a different group of lions approached my crash site. These weren't members of the original pride, but they followed the same protocol. They brought a sick cub, placed it near my shelter, and waited for assistance. The story of the human healer was spreading through the lion community. I treated 6 more cubs over the following days, all suffering from various degrees of dehydration and heat-related illness. Each successful treatment strengthened the bond between me and the local lion population. They began to view me not as an intruder in their territory, but as a valuable resource, a healer who could save their young when traditional methods failed. But the most incredible development came on the 4th day, when a search and rescue helicopter finally spotted my crash site. As the aircraft approached, the lions didn't scatter as I expected. Instead, they formed a tighter protective circle around me. They were defending me from what they perceived as a potential threat. Wild lions were protecting a human from other humans. The rescue team was understandably hesitant to approach when they saw me surrounded by a pride of lions. They hovered at a safe distance, trying to figure out how to extract me without triggering an attack. But the lionesses seemed to understand that these newcomers were there to help. They gradually moved away, creating a landing zone while maintaining visual contact with me. Captain James Mitchell, who led the rescue team later, said it was the most surreal extraction he had ever performed. As the medical team treated my injuries, the lions watched from a distance, like concerned family members waiting for news about a loved one. They had become emotionally invested in my welfare in a way that challenged everything we thought we knew about predator psychology. The original lioness approached the helicopter just before we departed. She carried her healthy cub, the one I had saved on that first night, and positioned herself where I could see them clearly. She was showing me one final time that her baby was thriving. She was saying goodbye and thank you in the only way she knew how. As we lifted off, I watched the pride gather in the spot where my shelter had been. They remained there for several minutes, as if they were paying their respects to the place where their human family member had lived among them. The bond we had formed was real and permanent, even though our time together was ending. The story of my week with the desert lions made international headlines when the rescue team shared their footage with the media. Scientists from around the world came to study the crash site and interview the local Swana people about unusual lion behavior in the area. My experience became a case study in interspecies cooperation and animal intelligence. Dr. Oshin established a research station near my crash site to continue studying the pride that had protected me. Her findings revolutionized our understanding of lion social behavior and cognitive abilities. The lions continued to visit the area regularly, as if they were maintaining a connection to the place where they had formed their unlikely alliance with a human. 6 months after my rescue, I returned to the Kalahari with a documentary crew to revisit the crash site. I wasn't sure if the lions would remember me, or if they would even still be in the area. But as our vehicle approached the familiar location, I heard sounds that made my heart race. The same vocalizations I had heard during my week of captivity. They were calling to me. The original lioness emerged from the bush and approached our vehicle with complete confidence. She had grown larger and more magnificent in the months since our encounter, but her distinctive facial markings were unmistakable. She was followed by her cub, now a healthy juvenile who showed no fear of humans whatsoever. They remembered me. They had been waiting for my return. The reunion was emotional for everyone involved. The lioness allowed me to approach within touching distance, something that would normally be impossible with a wild predator. Her cub played around my feet like a domestic cat, completely comfortable with human presence. I was witnessing the development of a new generation of lions who viewed humans as potential allies rather than automatic threats. Today, 3 years after, I raised my hands to surrender only to have a lioness gently drop her baby at my feet. The crash site has become a pilgrimage destination for researchers studying human-animal relationships. The pride that saved my life has become famous worldwide, and their story has changed how we think about the emotional and intellectual capabilities of wild predators. The original lioness is now a grandmother, and her extended family includes cubs who have never known a world where humans were automatically enemies. They approach researchers with curiosity rather than fear, creating unprecedented opportunities for scientific observation and conservation work. My week of captivity has become a model for peaceful coexistence between humans and predators. Every time I fly over the Kalahari, I scan the ground below, hoping to catch a glimpse of golden forms moving through the red sand, because I know that somewhere down there, a family of lions remembers the week when a crashed pilot became an honorary member of their pride. They taught me that trust can overcome any barrier between species, and that sometimes the most profound connections are born from the most desperate circumstances. The lioness who gently dropped her baby at my feet when I thought I was surrendering to death instead gave me the greatest gift of my life. She showed me that love, desperation, and hope are universal languages that every parent understands regardless of species. Her trust changed both of our lives forever and created a legacy that continues to bridge the gap between human and predator in ways that seemed impossible before that fateful night in the desert. That my hands were raised in surrender, but what I received was acceptance into a family that transcends species boundaries. The lions of the Kalahari taught me that sometimes when we think we're giving up, we're actually opening ourselves to possibilities we never imagined. Their protection during my darkest hour became the foundation for a relationship that proves every day that miracles are possible when different species choose trust over fear. I've been a bush pilot in Botswana for 8 years, flying researchers and tourists across the Kalahari Desert, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened when my plane went down 40 kilometers from the nearest human settlement. What I'm about to tell you sounds like something from a movie, but I have the scars and the memories to prove every word. My name is Captain Alex Morrison, and this is the story of how a forced landing turned into the most extraordinary encounter between human and predator ever documented. It was February 14th, 2024, around 4:20 p.m., when my engine started making sounds that no pilot ever wants to hear. I was flying a routine supply run to a remote research station when the oil pressure dropped to zero and black smoke began pouring from the cowling. I had maybe 3 minutes to find a place to put down before the engine seized completely. The Kalahari stretched endlessly in every direction, red sand and scattered acacia trees as far as the eye could see. I spotted a relatively flat area between two dry riverbeds and committed to an emergency landing that would either save my life or end it. The plane hit hard, bounced twice, and came to rest in a cloud of dust and twisted metal. I was alive, but barely. My left shoulder was dislocated, my ribs were bruised, and blood was streaming from a gash on my forehead. But I was breathing, and I could move, which meant I had a chance of survival. The real problem wasn't my injuries, it was my location. I was stranded in one of the most remote areas of the Kalahari, with no radio contact and no way to signal for help. My emergency beacon was damaged in the crash, and my satellite phone had been destroyed when the instrument panel collapsed. I was completely cut off from civilization with limited water supplies, and the African sun beating down mercilessly. I managed to extract my emergency kit from the wreckage and set up a basic shelter using pieces of the aircraft. The pain from my injuries was excruciating, but I knew I had to stay focused on survival. Water was my biggest concern. I had maybe 2 days' worth in my emergency supplies. After that, I would be in serious trouble. The nearest water source was at least 20 kilometers away, and I wasn't sure I could make that journey in my condition. As the sun began to set, I heard sounds that made my blood run cold. Lions, multiple lions vocalizing in the distance. The Kalahari might seem empty to the untrained eye, but it's actually home to some of Africa's most adaptable predators. Desert lions that have learned to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And I was now sharing their territory, with no protection except a flimsy shelter made from airplane parts. The sounds got closer as darkness fell. I could hear movement in the bush around my crash site. Footsteps, heavy breathing, the occasional low rumble of communication between Pride members. They were investigating the strange new addition to their territory. They were deciding whether I was prey threat or something else entirely. I sat in my makeshift shelter clutching a flare gun that was my only weapon and praying they would lose interest and move on. But they didn't move on. As the moon rose, I could see shapes moving in the shadows around my position, golden eyes reflecting the starlight. Massive forms circling my shelter like they were planning something. I had never felt so helpless in my life. I was injured, stranded, and surrounded by apex predators with nowhere to run and no way to defend myself effectively. Then I saw her. A lioness emerged from the shadows and walked directly toward my shelter. She was magnificent even in the dim moonlight, easily 300 pounds, of pure muscle and predatory grace. But something about her approach was different from what I expected. She wasn't stalking. She wasn't showing the typical signs of a predator preparing to attack. She was walking with purpose, but not aggression. At 10 meters she stopped, and I could see her clearly in the moonlight. She was carrying something in her mouth, something small and dark that I couldn't immediately identify. My first thought was that she had brought prey to share with her pride, but the size and shape were wrong. It was too small for typical lion prey, too large for a bird or small mammal. The lioness took another step forward, and I realized with growing terror that she was approaching my shelter directly. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at M to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped in a metal cage of my own making, with a wild predator closing the distance between us. I raised my hands in the universal gesture of surrender, hoping against hope that she would recognize my submission and spare my life. But what happened next defied every expectation I had about predator behavior. Instead of attacking, the lioness stopped just outside my shelter and gently placed whatever she had been carrying on the ground. Then she backed away 3 steps and sat down. She was presenting something to me, offering it for my inspection or consideration. A wild lioness was making a peaceful gesture toward a human. In the moonlight, I could finally see what she had brought. It was a cub, a tiny lion cub that couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. But something was terribly wrong with the little one. It wasn't moving. Its tiny body was limp and motionless. The cub appeared to be either unconscious or dead, and its mother had brought it to me. The lioness made a soft vocalization. Not a roar or a growl, but something almost like a whimper. She was trying to communicate with me about her baby. A wild predator was attempting to bridge the species gap through sound and gesture. She was asking for something. Help, understanding, guidance. I didn't know what, but her intent was unmistakable. I slowly emerged from my shelter, keeping my movements calm and predictable. The lioness watched every gesture, but showed no signs of aggression. Her ears weren't pinned back, her tail wasn't lashing, and her body posture wasn't threatening. Instead, she looked desperate, worried, like a mother who had run out of options and was turning to the only available source of help. As I approached the motionless cub, could see the full extent of the situation. The little one was breathing, but barely. Its chest was rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that suggested severe distress. There were no visible wounds or injuries, but the cub was clearly in critical condition. Dehydration, maybe. Heat exhaustion. Some kind of illness. That was beyond its mother's ability to treat. I knelt beside the cub and began a careful examination. The lioness moved closer, watching my every movement with intense focus. When I gently touched her baby, she made a sound that shocked me to my core. She purred. A wild lioness was purring as I handled her most precious possession. She was giving me permission. She was encouraging me to help. The cub was severely dehydrated and running a high fever. Its tiny tongue was dry, and its gums were pale. Without immediate intervention, it would be dead within hours. But I wasn't a veterinarian. I was a pilot with basic first aid training, trying to save the life of a wild lion cub while its mother watched, and somehow trusted me to know what to. I returned to my emergency kit and retrieved the electrolyte solution I carried for my own survival. Using a small syringe from my medical supplies, I began administering tiny amounts of fluid to the cub. The lioness watched every movement, her purring growing louder, as if she was encouraging both me and her baby. She was participating in the rescue effort in the only way she knew how. For the next several hours, I worked to stabilize the cub while its mother maintained her protective vigil. I used wet cloths to cool its fever-administered fluids to combat dehydration and monitored its vital signs as best I could with limited equipment. The lioness never left. She positioned herself where she could see everything I was doing and provided a constant rumbling soundtrack of maternal encouragement. As dawn approached, the cub's condition began to improve. Its breathing became more regular, its temperature started to drop, and it began to show signs of returning consciousness. When it finally opened its eyes and made a soft mewing sound, the lioness's reaction was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. She immediately began grooming her baby, welcoming it back to the world of the living. But what happened next changed my understanding of animal intelligence forever. The lioness looked directly at me and slowly lowered her massive head in what could only be interpreted as a bow of gratitude. She was thanking me for saving her child's life. A wild predator was showing respect and appreciation to a human who had helped her in her moment of greatest need.